Hi, I'm Jordan Schaus, one of the preachers at the Campbell Road Church of Christ. The sermon you're about to hear was preached at our church, where we are committed to preaching just the Bible. We're all about connecting the ancient truths of God to our modern times. We encourage you to open your Bibles, study along, and follow along with us as we study together and seek to live life the Bible way.
In Luke chapter 18, we're given a parable about what to do when some hard times come. But let me illustrate it like this for you here. It helps me understand this better. We've all been kids, so I think we can all relate to this. Have any of you ever really wanted something as a kid? Like you really want this thing. So you ask your parents about it, and you ask your parents about it, and they say no. And then you ask them again, and they say no. And you keep asking them, but eventually you wear them down enough to where they'll say, okay, fine, you can have it. For me, that was really easy because I had 5 siblings. So there was 5 other people trying to wear them down at the same time. But on the flip side, they had a lot of patience. So it was a mess. But sometimes do we do that with God with our prayers? Where we think if I just wear him down enough, if I just keep praying this, then I'll get what I want. Is that what our prayers are about? That's the question I'm asking. Is that what our prayers are about? Getting just what I want? I also, whenever I was a kid, same manner, I would just try different tactics. This was what I do. I really liked basketball growing up, and I always wanted new shoes for basketball. So I would ask my mom, and believe it or not, it's not always in the budget to buy shoes for 3 months. So I would ask, and it was a no. So I would try something else like, leaving the card open on the computer, or I would try talking about how much my shoes that I was wearing hurt my feet. I was outgrowing them, and I couldn't stop on the floor anymore. And I would just try different things to get it to work. But as a parent, you probably know that there's some other factors to consider in that situation when the answer is no. But as a kid, it's like, why don't I have new shoes? Everyone else does, and I just want new shoes. But as a parent, you know that there's more wisdom behind it. It's not in the budget, or he needs to learn a lesson. But it's not always easy to see that with ourselves, with God sometimes when we start to grow up. In Luke chapter 18, we're going to be looking through this parable in the first 8 verses. I'm just going to tell you where we're going. And then we're going to look at a case study in the Old Testament. And then we're going to look at ourselves and how this relates to us. In Luke 18 and verse 1, now he was telling them a parable to show that at all times they ought to pray and not lose heart. Now we're going to stop here. We're not going to stop every verse, but I want to point out a few things from this. First is that this parable was written, and thankfully Luke tells us what it's about, for this issue right here. The story that Jesus gives us, he gives these apostles and disciples, is this story for this issue that we'll face in our lives. And I want us to hold this story and read it like that. Like this is what Christ gave us to help us through this issue. So remember that as we work through this. But now what is it about again? That they ought to always pray and not lose heart. That obviously implies 2 things, and one is that it's not always intuitive that we always pray. It doesn't always seem like we should always pray. And not only that, sometimes we can lose heart in our prayers. And I'd offer to you that sometimes we can lose heart in our prayers, and that's the real issue, is that, I keep praying, but I've lost all my heart in my prayer. So what's the point in the prayer? But here we are. Keep reading with me in verse 2. Let's read this story. Saying, in a certain city there was a judge who did not fear God nor respect man. There was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. For a while he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise by continually coming she will wear me out. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now will not God bring about justice for his elect, who cry to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you, that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? I really want us to remember that last verse in this. At the end of this parable, Jesus says, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith? He's insinuating that this is going to be something difficult. Because he has to question, after he tells this parable, are you guys going to live this out to the end? At the end of your life, are you going to be able to say that you've lived this way? That's what Jesus is trying to show here. But let's look at the widow. The widow in their day and age was not quite how it is today. It's still a hard life. But for them, They were bottom of the totem pole financially, and it was very hard for them socially. They were supposed to be taken care of, though. If we were related to this widow, if this was your sister, or if this was your daughter or your mother, and you saw the situation this widow was living in, you'd be like, this woman needs justice. Something needs to be done for this woman. Because look at what it says in verse 3. The widow's asking the judge in verse 3, give me legal protection from my opponent. And if you're reading a different version than me, it says something like this, give me justice against my adversary. And we'd all agree with that. This widow needs justice because someone's doing something wrong to her. Whether they're not taking care of her like she should, or she's being abused, or something's not right with this widow. And we'd all agree with that. We all want justice. That's not something that is a far-fetched idea from us. Similar when we were kids, if you had a sibling growing up and you got in a fight and the sibling got punished, but it didn't seem like a just punishment, you weren't very happy about it. It's like, okay, you got him, Mom, but that wasn't fair. Like, he hit me a lot harder. It's the same thing. We really want justice. That's something we all yearn for, and that's not the issue in the parable, whether we yearn for it or not. That's something we all share in. But this widow was going to a judge. And what is the judge supposed to do? The judge is supposed to bring about justice. That's what they're there for. You're supposed to bring your problems to the judge, and he's supposed to hear them and decide whether or not the situation is just. And if it's not, then we're going to find a plan to bring about justice. But this judge doesn't really seem like that, does it? In verse 2, it says, he didn't fear God nor fear man. He didn't fear God nor respect man. He had no cares about that. He didn't care about this widow. He didn't care about God. So obviously this judge doesn't care about justice. But remember again, who's the widow bringing this to? Someone who's supposed to uphold justice. And the only reason that this judge listens is because she keeps coming to him and pestering him, like we were when we were kids to our parents. I'm just going to keep pestering this judge till he listens. And we don't know how long this was over. We don't know if this was years or months or weeks, but it was over some time, because what the judge says there in verse 5 and 6 is, yet this widow bothers me, otherwise she'll wear me out. And maybe you feel that as a parent, and you're dealing with that last week. But the idea that it's trying to convey is she's going to give him a black eye, and it's going to hurt really bad. And if I don't do anything, she's going to take up all my time, and she's going to just keep pounding on me with all her requests, and I'll have no time for anything. So he's like, okay, I'll listen to this widow, because she won't keep quiet, and it's like a bird just screaming in your ear every morning. So he listens. But it's not out of justice. He does it so for himself, for his own comfort. It was about comfort for him, contrasted with the widow's justice. And the thing where I think we're supposed to take away from this judge in verse 7 and 8 is that this judge is nothing like the God we petition to, is it? The God we petition to respects man, and he cares for us. And he cares about justice, and he hears our cries, and he's listening. But this judge has nothing to do with that. And when you think about it, this widow had every reason to stop coming to this judge, didn't she? She could have come up with every reason not to come back to him, because she'd come to him time and time again and he'd done nothing. Like, why is she still going to this person? Have you ever had a situation like that where you had every reason to stop, but you just kept doing it? That's what this widow was like. But she cared so much about justice, and she needed that, and she yearned for that she didn't stop. And I think that's why she didn't stop, because it wasn't merely just about her own comfort. If she had just said, find a way to help me, she could have found help somewhere, maybe by how she could have been taken care of by her government or by her family. But she was seeking justice. But look at God in verse 7 and 8 one more time with me. Now will not God bring about justice for his elect, who cry out to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Jesus he asks rhetorically, then declares two things here. That God will bring about justice for those who cry out to him day and night. And he questions, will he delay long over them? And the declaration he makes in verse 8 is, he will bring justice and it will come quickly. But I have a question for you this morning. Does it always seem like justice is coming quickly? I really want you to answer that question for yourself. Whatever's going on in your life or has happened in your life, does it always seem like justice is happening? And does it seem like it's happening quickly? I'd venture to say, at least for my life, I know it doesn't always seem like that. And I'm only 23, and some of you have lived way longer than me, and you've seen way more things happen for way longer, and you understand this, that it doesn't always seem like justice is happening quickly. But what do we do during that time? Well, remember what this parable is about, that we have to pray always and not lose heart. What did the widow not lose heart in? It was that the judge would bring about justice. And as we talked about last week in our meeting, God will bring justice, but it doesn't always seem that clear. And that reminds me of the case study we're going to look at in Habakkuk. There's a prophet in our Old Testament Bibles of Habakkuk. If you would turn to Habakkuk, we're going to spend some time there and look at this because he struggles with something similar to what we're looking at in this parable. He struggles through it, and I love this book because it's real short, so we can look at it very quickly, but he prays to God and he asks God for something, and God will answer him, and then he'll answer again, and then God will answer, and he'll answer one more time. But he's struggling through this prayer. Again, this isn't over a short period of time either. If you look in Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 2, "How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and will you not hear? I cry to you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity, and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arise. Therefore the law is ignored, and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted." Habakkuk is looking around, and he's seeing terrible violence, and he's asking God, how long is this going to happen? And not only that, why are you even making me see these things? He's seeing things that I've never seen in my life, and I hope I never do. But he's asking God, where's the justice in this? Because the justice that is happening is being perverted. It's not even real. The people who should be losing are winning. But the Lord responds to this. And remember that Habakkuk is bringing this to God, and that whenever Habakkuk says, "How long, O Lord?" that obviously means he's been looking at this for quite some time now. In verse 5, though, the Lord responds, "Look among the nations, observe, be astonished and wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people, who march throughout the earth, to seize dwelling places which are not theirs." And whenever the Lord says, "Look and be astonished," you better buckle up, especially for Habakkuk here. Because in verse 6, is that the answer that Habakkuk was looking for after all he had said? That the Lord is going to raise up the Chaldeans and that these people are going to seize what's not theirs? That is not at all the answer to the prayer Habakkuk was looking for. Things are going to get worse, Habakkuk. Look at that. Habakkuk, that's not what he's looking for. The answer to his prayer was no, almost. But the Lord goes on throughout his reply here in the first chapter and talks about how bad it's going to be, how fierce their army is going to be, how swift it's going to be, and they're going to be taken, and it's going to be violent. But in verse 11, note with me something here. In Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 11, "Then they will sweep through like wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, those whose strength is their God." God reminds Habakkuk, though, that they're not innocent in this. These Chaldeans, these Babylonians, they're not innocent in all of this. They will be held guilty for what's going on. So Habakkuk responds now. He hears that the Chaldeans are coming, and it's for sure, and it's going to be violent, but justice will be upheld. So Habakkuk responds now to this in verse 12. "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct. Your eyes are too pure for evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up the more righteous than they?" Habakkuk first is reminded of who God is. At the beginning, he says, "O Lord, you have appointed them to judge. You have established them to correct. You are holy. Your eyes are too pure for evil." Like you can't even look on evil. But in the same breath, in verse 13, he says, "But why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up? Like, the Israelites, we at least pray to God sometimes. That's what Habakkuk's trying to get at here. We do some things. We have some righteous among us. Why is it that the the Babylonians are coming to get us? And he gets that all out in one breath. And in verse 17, at the end of verse 17, and continually slay nations without sparing. Are they just going to keep doing this and you're going to look idly by? Habakkuk questions. And I want us to note that he puts all that in one prayer, that he remembers who God is and that he is holy and just, but he still struggles with this. It's not like he had it all figured out in one go. This is over some time, and he's saying, look, I don't know how all this works together, Lord. But where Habakkuk's heart is in the terrible chapter break of chapter 2 in verse 1. I will stand on my guard posts and station myself on the rampart, and I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me, and how I may reply when I am reproved. Habakkuk says, okay, Lord, I've gotten everything out that's on my heart. I'm going to sit and watch now, and watch what you will do, but also what you will say to me. And in the last part in verse 1, it's one of the most humble endings to a prayer that I can even think of. He says, I will listen, and how I may reply when I am reproved. He knows who the Lord is in his wisdom. He says, I know everything I've just said, Lord, but I know your wisdom is greater, and that I'm going to be reproved by the things you are about to say. Do any of you wish your kids would say that sometimes? They did something wrong, and then they say all these things, and they're saying, okay, just reprove me now. Okay, I get it. I know I'm wrong because you're wiser. We don't say that. I never said that as a kid. I had too much pride. But I was very stubborn. But that's not how Habakkuk is, because he remembers the Lord's wisdom, right? In this situation, would it be easy for Habakkuk to remember the Lord's wisdom and justice during all of this? Answer that question and, give me a head shake or a nod. Would it be easy for him to see the justice of the Lord with everything going on right now? No, it wouldn't. But he says, Lord, I trust your wisdom is greater. And the Lord answers in verse 2, record this vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one may read it may run. That's a scary statement. And the Lord goes on in this and says, woe to all these types of people and types of actions, that if you do these things, that justice will be served for it. Look with me in verse 12. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with violence. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that people toil for fire, that nations grow weary for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the seas. And that's essentially what he's going over in his reply to Habakkuk here, is these people are not going off scotch-free. They're not getting away with it, Habakkuk. Listen to this. And then in verse 18, he points out one more thing about these people that are coming. What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image a teacher of falsehood? For its maker trusts in its own handiwork when he fashions speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a piece of wood, awake, to a mute stone, arise. And that is your teacher? That is your teacher. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath inside it at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. What were all these people trusting in? They were trusting in themselves and what they could do. The idols they were carving, the only power that was in them was that they carved it, and there's no breath inside it. But the Lord is set apart, and the Lord is holy. And now Habakkuk responds one more time. We're almost wrapped up with looking at Habakkuk here. But stay with me. In chapter 3, Habakkuk hears this from the Lord. Lord, I have heard the report about you, and I fear. I fear, O Lord. Revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of your years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. Go back to the beginning of Habakkuk's prayer. What he was asking for and what the Lord responded with, it's still going to happen. The Babylonians are still coming, but he's saying, Lord, after you explained all these things to me, in the wrath of your discipline, please remember mercy for us. He's accepted what the Lord has said. And he goes on with this prayer, with this song of who the Lord is. But look with me at the end of this prayer in verse 16. I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble. because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Now, let me ask you a question here. Have you ever been there where Habakkuk is, where your lips are quivering and you're shaking and you're sweating and you can't think straight? You can't even sleep because there seems to be some injustice in your life that's not being taken care of, whether that's physically or with your health or with your family's health or financially. Have you ever been there where you're just, you don't know what to do and you don't know what the next plan is and you're just shaking? That's where Habakkuk is, because what does he say at the end of verse 16? I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. You know, Habakkuk was cursed with the knowledge here because he knew what was coming and had to wait for it and sit and wait. Here comes the Babylonians and they're going to take us, and I have to wait for that day now. And he's trembling at the thought of that. He's trembling and wrestling with this prayer. Because look what he says in verse 17 and 18. Though the fig tree should not blossom and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength, and he makes my feet like hinds' feet. He makes me walk on high places. What is the declaration Habakkuk is making here after he said all this? Remember where he's at. He's trembling and shaking here, but at the end of his prayer, he says, things can get worse. You know, things can stay just as how they are, Lord, but spring can come and there's going to be nothing. There's going to be a famine. Things can get worse. The violence could be worse, Lord. But even still, even if all those things happen, you know, the prayer that he was praying didn't get answered how he wanted it to. Even if all of it happens and it's 10 times worse, Lord, I still trust in you. Lord, I still exalt in you. You are the God of my salvation. You, Lord, are my strength. You make me walk on high places. And I point this out in Habakkuk especially because the fear he has in all of this. He says this in fear because I don't want to be too harsh about this, because this is something we struggle with, right? This is something Habakkuk is struggling with, but he's sharing it all with the Lord. You know, he's shaking as he's saying this. This isn't easy. But now we're going to connect this all back to Luke 18, so bear with me here. As I was reading Luke 18 and reading it over and over again, I was really hoping we could just leave it at verse 1, where it says, you know, this parable was written that we ought to always pray and not lose heart. And that would be a great sermon where I just leave you with that. Everybody, keep praying and don't lose heart in your prayers. But I've been told that before, and it's helpful, but it didn't cause me to think about much. It was just, okay, I'll pray more and I won't lose heart. Thanks, okay. But there's a lot harder things from this, as we see in Habakkuk. And as we paint the picture in real life, I think we can see where this comes to life. I'm going to share some things about my life where I struggled with this, and I continue to struggle with these kinds of things in my life. Let me start here. About 5 years ago, I went to college, so I'm still quite young. But 5 years ago, I went to college in 2021, and I did everything I could my senior year to graduate high school early. I took like 5 or 6 extra classes online so I could leave home and be with my friends and have fun. And I thought it was great. You know, I got to school in January and I was like, this is great. This is everything I was hoping for. But about a month into school, you know, I'm hundreds and hundreds of miles away from home. I get a call from my dad that my mom has cancer. And as I've left home with every intention to leave as soon as I could, that hit a little harder too, right? And in the beginning, this is about our prayers, right? In the beginning, here's how my prayers were. Lord, take this away. Lord, I don't want this anymore. And it came out of a place of comfort. Me comfort and the prayers of coming to the Lord, but also the comfort of, Lord, I know you can heal this. You are the God who moves mountains, who raises from the dead. I know you can heal this, and I trust in that. But I just wanted things to be how they were, right? I wanted things to be how they were 3 months ago, where everything was happy and we were all fine and healthy. Like, this didn't seem just, right? It doesn't seem like justice here. Anybody who's gone through something like this understands that. You question, where's the justice in this? But as time moved on, many of you know who have been through health concerns or had trial after trial. You don't always get the answer you want, right? Not every doctor's appointment goes how you want. Not every surgery heals like it should. Not every diagnosis is given with a great way to heal it. Some of them are given nothing. And then in those moments when you've been praying this prayer for months, and I'm talking over a period of years, this wasn't a period of weeks or days. I didn't figure this out quick, and I haven't figured it out. But you continue to pray that prayer, and then things get worse. And that's when I had to answer a question for myself is, okay, what if things did, thank God and praise the Lord that my mom's doing well now. But what if things did get worse? Well, what if the answer is always what we wanted? Where would my faith be then? Because for a moment, they were dependent on my comfort and if the Lord answered this. They were. If things got worse, I don't know what would have happened. I have faith in those around me and my family that they would have lifted me up, but sometimes we just seek comfort in our prayers, right? But they go hand in hand. I'm getting a little, I'm getting into some weeds semantically, but they kind of go hand in hand, right? The justice and comfort. Because why do we feel uncomfortable sometimes? It's because things aren't how they were intended to be from the beginning, right? How God designed it in the beginning, and there's perversions of that, and there's disease, and there's death, and there's justice that's not being upheld, and we say, Lord, I don't want things to be like this anymore. And that's good, and that came from a good heart. But we have to come to the place of justice here. That's where I had to answer, because things do get worse sometimes. And how will you trust in the Lord then? How will you trust in the Lord then when there's a long period of waiting or things get worse like they did for Habakkuk? That's the question I had to answer for my faith. Look at this and turn back with me to Luke 18. In Luke 18, I think this is part of what Jesus is trying to get at here. Remember what the widow was going through. She had every reason to stop praying. Have you ever been through something where seemingly, if you just wrote down the events that have taken place in your life and you wrote them down in a book, it seems like he has every reason to stop praying because it doesn't seem like anything's happening. There's a delay. As we noted in verse 8, the justice will come quickly, and we noted how it doesn't always seem quickly. It doesn't say immediately there. As we talked about last week, that some of the justice that is coming is at the end. And the great declarations in Revelation of that are incredibly powerful for us. Because as Habakkuk saw, as many of us have seen, and throughout Scripture we see that justice will come in the end. But it doesn't always seem like that in our lives. And it's so important that we remember those things. That remember God is just. And hold on to that. But similarly, as Jesus did, he declared it. And I want you to think about the prayer Jesus made in Luke 22. We've seen this with the widow and how she continually came, and we see this with Habakkuk, how he wrestled with this. But Jesus declared this in his words, but he declared it in his actions in Luke chapter 22. As he's praying in the garden in Gethsemane, what does he say? He says, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And at the beginning of that prayer, take this cup away from me. And he's praying for both of these things fully, right? He's not just throwing both one or the other out there just for fun. He's saying, Lord, as a human, as the man that he was, I don't want to go through the things that are about to happen. Like, it's going to be very hard and physically tough. And the weight that it's bearing on him mentally, I don't want to go through this. And in the same prayer, in the same breath, he says, not my will, but yours be done. Have we ever done that? Have we ever tacked that onto a prayer? Where we give the Lord a long list, a laundry list of things we want, and not only how we want, but not only what we want, but how we want them to play out. Lord, fix this and fix it like this, and we go on for hours, and then we say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. I've done that many times, where I've just tacked that on because I've heard it, and I know Jesus said it, and I know that's the way I should feel. But to be honest, and I'm sure if most of us were honest, we haven't always felt that way, right? We really, really want the things that we've asked for to happen. But we forget about God's wisdom sometimes. That God's way of justice and God's plans are greater. And as Jesus said that thing of, Lord, not my will, but yours be done, he really, really meant it. And what did he mean by that? He says, Lord, I know that your plans and your way of justice and mercy are far greater than mine. And as Habakkuk fell in humility here, Lord, I trust in that fully, that yours is greater. And I'm going to trust in that. And not only did he just say it, he lived it. Because what did he do after that? He spent all night praying that and trembling in his prayers and sweating drops of blood. But right after that, he was taken, and he surrendered himself to walk fully into this. He said, Lord, I trust your plan that much, and I trust your justice and your wisdom that much. And that's what I'm trying to offer you this morning to think about and consider in your prayers and in your life, is that we surrender fully to God in this. Just like a parent, as we can see that clearly, we forget how much more wisdom God has sometimes when we get caught up. We grow up and or at least I think I have everything figured out, but I'm still young. I'll grow up and I'll figure out that I'm not as smart as I think. But do we fall into that, to where we think my plan is greater and the things I'm asking for are greater? I'm not saying to give up in prayers and the things you're asking for. That's not what Habakkuk did. That's not what David did in the Psalms. We never see that. But what we do see is from David, from Habakkuk, from Jesus, is that, Lord, I trust in you still. Even if things don't go how I think they should or how my comfort comes, I trust in you still. And that's the declaration made in Luke 18. So this is what I want to offer you this morning. What will you do in the delay? Answer this question and think about what's going on right now in your life. What will you do when the delay comes? Just like the widow, when you cry out in prayer and it doesn't seem like anything's coming. Will you continue to have faith? Remember the call that Jesus has at the end of this parable. When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth? He said this for a reason, because it's a difficult thing to work through. Will he find faith on earth when he returns? When it seems like there's every reason you should give up in your prayers and lose heart, will you continue on? Will you remember that God is just and merciful? Will you remember that God has wisdom and far greater wisdom than myself? Will you do that? When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth? If you look at the title of the next parable in Luke 18, it's the Pharisee and the publican. And I think there's a theme going on with the parables in a row here, because the next parable is about the Pharisee who prays out loud. You've heard this parable. The one that prays out loud and justifies himself. Lord, I'm so holy, not like these other people. And then there's the lawyer who says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. You know what the difference there is? It is one justifies himself and one fully depends on God. And as we're supposed to think about this in prayer, are we justifying ourselves and that's what we're holding on to? Or are we fully depending on God? Do we fully depend on God in our prayers with how we pray, and always in every situation, and not losing heart and having faith in God? Or do we give up and act like this Pharisee? So that's what I'm encouraging you with this morning, that we fully depend on God in our prayers and relinquish the things in our lives to God and fully surrender with that. And when we pray, not my will, but yours be done, we really mean it. We really mean it, because there's nothing more important than God's will and God's kingdom come.
Thank you so much for listening to this sermon. You can find more sermons and resources at our website, thebibleway.com. If you have any questions over anything that you've heard, we'd love to talk about them with you, and you can contact us at info@thebibleway.com. If you'd like to study together, we'd love to meet with you face-to-face. Contact us through our website or come to meet us face-to-face this next Sunday. We'll have a seat saved just for you.